ലേക്ക് ഇല്ലാത്ത ടെക്സ്റ്റാണ്. Hamlet is actually prescribed for non-detailed study. അതുകൊണ്ട് അതിലേക്ക് ടെക്സ്റ്റിന്റെ ഒരുപാട് ഉള്ളിലേക്ക് പോയിട്ട് ആനോട്ടേഷൻസും അങ്ങനത്തെ സംഭവങ്ങളൊന്നും ഉണ്ടാവില്ല. പണ്ട് അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു ഷേക്സ്പിയർ പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ. ദിസ് ടൈം Hamlet is not prescribed for detailed study, but still you should have a general idea about it. So I think you all read the text, and now we have also discussed the different acts in some detail. So that should be clear. And I had given you something to read about the sources of Hamlet. So that also hopefully you have read. Adilekku njan ini detail aayittu povunilla. So where did Shakespeare get this story of Hamlet from? What were some of the early versions of the story of Hamlet which might have inspired Shakespeare? Adinte oru write up pole adine pattittu njangalku oru link thannittundayirunnu. So now in this particular class, I thought we will look at some ways of looking at Hamlet critically. Critical aayittu Hamlet ne approach cheyyunnande some directions. ഓരോന്നിലേക്കും വളരെ ഡീറ്റെയിൽ ആയിട്ട് നമ്മൾ പോകുന്നില്ല. I will give you more links to some of those critical essays, etc., and you can look at them in more detail. I had also, I hope you have listened to the recorded class that I gave you about the substance of Shakespearean tragedy. അത് വളരെ ബേസിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ടെക്സ്റ്റ് ആണ്. ഷേക്സ്പിയറിയൻ ട്രാജഡി പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ, വെദർ ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് ഹാംലെറ്റ്, മാക്ബെത്ത്, ഒതെല്ലോ ഓർ കിങ് ലിയർ, ഗ്രേറ്റ് ട്രാജഡീസ് പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ ആൻഡ് ഷേക്സ്പിയറിയൻ ട്രാജഡി ഇൻ ജനറൽ പഠിക്കുമ്പോൾ വളരെ ബേസിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ടെക്സ്റ്റ് ആണ് നമ്മുടെ AC ബ്രാഡ്ലിന്റെ ഷേക്സ്പിയറിയൻ ട്രാജഡി. ഐ ഹാവ് ഓൾസോ ഗിവൻ യു റെക്കോർഡഡ് ക്ലാസ് ഓൺ ദാറ്റ്. ഐ ഹോപ്പ് യു ഹാവ് ലിസൺ ടു ഇറ്റ്. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പ്ലീസ് ഗോ ആൻഡ് ലിസൺ ടു ഇറ്റ്. അപ്പോൾ ഇനി some other ways of looking at Hamlet critically. That's what we are going to look at in today's class. So first of all, we will see what are the features of Hamlet as a revenge play. Hamletനെ early critics കണ്ടിരുന്നത് രണ്ട് രീതിയിലാണ്. One as a revenge play and the other as a problem play. ഷേക്സ്പിയറുടെ പ്ലേസിന്റെ ഇടയിൽ നമ്മൾ ട്രാജഡീസ്, കോമഡീസ്, histories, and then there are some plays that are considered to be problem plays. So അങ്ങനെ problem play എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലും ചില ആൾക്കാർ ഹാംലെറ്റിനെ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. because even though actually mostly it is known as a tragedy and one of the 4 great tragedies, still there are some people who say it should be also considered a problem play. And the problem play from Shakespeare's latter stage and almost his most mature phase എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു കാലഘട്ടത്തിന് എഴുതിയ വർക്ക്സ് ആണ് problem plays, and Hamlet is one of them. 1600 or 1601 ഹാംലെറ്റ് ആദ്യമായിട്ട് ഷേക്സ്പിയർ എഴുതി പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, അന്നത്തെ തിയേറ്ററിൽ പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ആ 1600s കടക്കുമ്പോഴേക്കും ഷേക്സ്പിയറുടെ ഒരു ലേറ്റ് ഫേസിലേക്ക് നമ്മൾ ചെല്ലുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ ഇങ്ങനെ ഈ രണ്ട് രീതിയിൽ വൈ ക്രിറ്റിക്സ് ഹാവ് ലുക്ക്ഡ് അറ്റ് ഹാംലെറ്റ് ആസ് എ റിവെഞ്ച് പ്ലേ ആൻഡ് ഓൾസോ ആസ് എ പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേ എന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ ബ്രീഫായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് ആദ്യം പറയാം. ദെൻ വി വിൽ മൂവ് ഓൺ ടു അതർ ക്രിട്ടിക്കൽ മെറ്റീരിയൽസ്. First of all, what is a revenge play or a revenge tragedy? Revenge tragedy is a new genre that came up in the 16th century, late 16th century, and the most famous work in this genre is the Spanish tragedy by Thomas Kyd, K-Y-D. The Spanish tragedy by Thomas Kyd. This is considered to be the most famous work in the genre known as revenge tragedy. So this was a new genre that had come up in late Elizabethan England, and there are certain elements that came to be associated with the revenge tragedy. അപ്പോൾ സ്പാനിഷ് ട്രാജഡി ആണ് ഏറ്റവും ഫേമസ് എങ്കിലും ആ സമയത്ത് വേറെ ഒരുപാട് റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡീസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അതിന് അങ്ങനെ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ ജാണറിന്റെ ചില ഫീച്ചേഴ്സ് critics started to identify. What are some of these elements? So first of all, there must be a hero who must avenge an evil deed, often encouraged by the apparition of a close friend or relatives. So the hero of a revenge tragedy has to actually perform revenge on someone. And revenge edukka ennu parayumbol it must be an evil deed that is being avenged. So ആർക്കോ എതിരെ എന്തോ ഒരു ഈവിൾ ഡീഡ് ചെയ്തു. അതിന്റെ എതിരെ ഈവിൾ ഡീഡ് ചെയ്ത ആൾക്കെതിരെ റിവെഞ്ച് എടുക്കണം ആര്, നമ്മളുടെ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡിയുടെ ഹീറോ. And often in many cases that man, the hero, is encouraged to take revenge by the apparition means a ghost or a specter, by the apparition of a close friend or relative. അപ്പൊ ഇയാളുടെ ക്ലോസ് ഫ്രണ്ടോ റിലേറ്റീവോ ആയിരിക്കും the wronged person, the person who has been subjected to that evil deed, and the apparition or the ghost of that person will come and encourage the hero to take revenge. And we can see that clearly in Hamlet as well. The evil deed was the murder of the murder of King Hamlet by Claudius. And King Hamlet was Hamlet's close relative. He was his father, and his apparition, his ghost, comes and clearly directs Hamlet to take revenge on his death to avenge his death by taking revenge on Claudius. So that is the first element, one of the elements of a revenge play. Then the next element of a revenge play is scenes of death and mutilation. വളരെ വയലന്റ് ആയിരുന്നു ഈ റിവെഞ്ച് പ്ലേസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. On the stage. So revenge acts.
Ma'am, there is a voice break.
Off stage. Sorry, voice break ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ടോ?
Yes, ma'am.
One second.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just hold on 1 second. Hello, is it better now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Clear on? Oh, okay, fine. Okay, so first എല്ലാവർക്കും കിട്ടിയില്ലേ? The hero who must take revenge for an evil deed, often encouraged by the apparition of a close friend or relative. Second element is scenes of death and mutilation. അപ്പൊ പഴയ ഗ്രീക്ക് ട്രാജഡീസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഗ്രീക്ക് ഡ്രാമയില് നമുക്ക് വയലന്റ് ആയ സീൻസ് ഒന്നും ഓൺ ദ സ്റ്റേജ് കാണിച്ചു തരില്ലായിരുന്നു. അതിന് പകരം ഈ എലിസബത്തൻ ഡ്രാമയിൽ നമ്മൾ പല വയലൻസും ഓൺ സ്റ്റേജ് തന്നെ കാണും. അപ്പൊ അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഇൻ ദ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡി ദർ ആർ മെനി സീൻസ് ഓഫ് ഡെത്ത് ആൻഡ് മ്യൂട്ടിലേഷൻ. ഒരുപാട് വയലന്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള സീൻസ് നമ്മൾ ഉണ്ടാവും. ആൻഡ് വി കെൻ സീ ദാറ്റ് ഇൻ Hamlet as well. So many people are murdered on screen. Polonius is killed on screen. Then finally there is that even though some deaths are only reported, like the death of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and the death of King Hamlet as well, but still the final scene where Hamlet and Leartes stab each other, the queen dies of poison and Hamlet stabs the king, all these are shown online. So there is a lot of death and mutilation being represented not online, sorry, on stage. Then the third element is insanity or feigned insanity. Feigned, F-E-I-G-N-E-D. Feigned means that somebody is feigning, somebody is pretending to be insane. So sometimes in revenge plays there is real insanity, sometimes there is feigned insanity or pretended insanity. And in Hamlet, it is critics still have not agreed which one it is. Was Hamlet really mad, or was he only pretending to be mad, or was he partly mad and partly pretending to be mad? Nobody actually knows. So these kind of scenes of insanity or feigned insanity can also be seen in Hamlet. Then there are sub-plays. Sub-plays can be of different parts. S-U-B. Sub-plays. They can be of different types. One is the plot device called play within a play. Play within a play is where you have a play going on and then there is another play that is being presented inside that play. So it is a slightly meta kind of effect that you have. ഒരു നാടകം നമ്മൾ കണ്ടുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന നാടകത്തിന്റെ അകത്ത് വേറെ ആരോ ഒരു നാടകം പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നു, and that we can clearly see in Act 3, the play within a play. We have a play like that in Hamlet as well. So that is one way of showing sub-plays, a play within a play. അത് റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡിയുടെ റിവെഞ്ച് ഡ്രാമയുടെ ഒരു ജനറൽ ഫീച്ചർ ആയിരുന്നു. ബട്ട് Another aspect is also subplots. So that we will come to that in a moment. Subplotകളും ഒരു മെയിൻ പ്ലോട്ട് ഓഫ് റിവെഞ്ച് കൂടാതെ സബ് പ്ലോട്ടുകളും ഉണ്ടാവാം. ആൻഡ് ഈ സബ് പ്ലേ ആണെങ്കിലും സബ് പ്ലോട്ട്സ് ആണെങ്കിലും they also reflect the theme of revenge in some way or the other. That was the fourth element, subplays. And the fifth element is the violent death of the hero. Usually, the hero of the revenge drama will take his revenge but also end up facing a violent death. അപ്പോൾ അയാൾ റിവെഞ്ച് എടുക്കും, പക്ഷേ അൾട്ടിമേറ്റ്ലി അയാൾ തന്നെ ഒരു വയലന്റ് ഡെത്തിന് വിധേയനാവും. ഹി വിൽ ബി സബ്ജക്റ്റഡ് ടു എ വയലന്റ് ഡെത്ത്. സോ ദ ഹീറോ ഓഫ് എ റിവെഞ്ച് play, that is also why it is called a revenge tragedy. So the hero of a revenge tragedy will after taking his revenge, usually after taking his revenge, he will be subjected to a violent death. So these are some of the important features of revenge tragedy, and you can see that all these features can be seen in Hamlet as well. At the end, we know there is general death and mutilation, but there is also the death of Hamlet. And as I mentioned, one of the most famous plays in that genre, especially during the Elizabethan time, which could possibly have inspired Shakespeare, is the Spanish tragedy by Thomas Kyd. But revenge tragedy has a much longer history as well. Elizabethan England അതൊരു പുതിയ genre ആയിരുന്നെങ്കിലും അതിനൊരു ലോങ്ങർ ഹിസ്റ്ററി ഉണ്ട്. ഏൻഷ്യന്റ് റോമൻ പ്ലേസിൽ നമുക്ക് ഇങ്ങനത്തെ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡി കാണാവുന്നതാണ്. ആൻഡ് ദ ഫേമസ് റോമൻ പോയറ്റ് ആൻഡ് ഫിലോസഫർ Seneca, Seneca, Seneca is known as the father of revenge tragedy. ഈ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ജാൻറിന്റെ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ യൂസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള ആളും ഏറ്റവും ഫേമസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള എക്സ്പോണന്റും in the entire world is the ancient Roman poet and philosopher Seneca. His full name is Lucius Annius Seneca. You can look up about him later. So these are some of the features of a revenge tragedy, and we can see that Hamlet can be considered to fit that particular genre as well. അപ്പോൾ എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഹാംലെറ്റിനെ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡി എന്ന് പല ക്രിറ്റിക്സും കൺസിഡർ ചെയ്യുന്നത് എന്നുള്ളതിന് ഇത് നമുക്ക് ഒരു we can see. But at the same time, what is interesting about Shakespeare's plays is precisely that you can't completely fit them into a mold. For revenge tragedy എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിന്റെ എലിമെന്റ്സ് ഹാംലെറ്റിൽ ഉണ്ട് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാലും Hamlet is not exhausted by the revenge tragedy. Hamlet is much richer than the revenge tragedy. സാധാരണ ഒരു റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡിന്റെ എലിമെന്റ്സ് കൂടാതെ ഒരുപാട് കുറെ കൂടി കോംപ്ലെക്സ് ആയ പല എലിമെന്റ്സും ഹാംലെറ്റിലുണ്ട്. അത് ക്യാരക്ടറൈസേഷൻ വഴിയാവാം, പ്ലോട്ട് വഴിയാവാം, തീമാറ്റിക് ആയിട്ടാവാം, ഇൻ വാട്ട് ഇറ്റ് സേസ് അബൌട്ട് ഹ്യൂമൻ നേച്ചർ, ഇൻ ദ യൂണിവേഴ്സൽ മെസ്സേജസ് ദാറ്റ് ഇറ്റ് പ്രസൻസ്, അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ ആയിരിക്കാം. സോ ഇറ്റ് ഹാസ് ഓൾ ദി എലിമെന്റ്സ് ഓഫ് എ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡി, ബട്ട് ഇറ്റ് ട്രാൻസെൻസ് ദാറ്റ് genre of revenge tragedy as well എന്നാണ് പല ക്രിറ്റിക്സും പറയുന്നത്. Next, let us look at Hamlet as a problem play. So what exactly are problem plays? Problem plays are അതിനെ രണ്ട് രീതിയിൽ നോക്കാം. ഒന്ന്, ഒരു പ്രോബ്ലം, ഒരു കോംപ്ലിക്കേറ്റഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള പ്ലോട്ട്, ഒരു കോംപ്ലക്സ് ആയ ഒരു പ്രോബ്ലത്തിനെ ഡീൽ ചെയ്യുന്നു എന്നുള്ള അർത്ഥത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേ എന്ന് പറയാം. സെക്കൻഡ്ലി, a problem playയുടെ resolution is in many ways problematic. So sometimes you may not be very happy with the resolution, you may not be very satisfied with the resolution, even though in a typical Shakespearean tragedy, according to A.C. Bradley, you come out feeling, if not happy, at least you feel that in some way aesthetically you feel satisfied. But some critics have pointed out that in the problem plays of Shakespeare, rather than satisfaction, you feel a little bit of dissatisfaction at how the resolution has played out. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെയും ഹാംലെറ്റിനെ കാണാമെന്ന് ചില ആൾക്കാർ പറയുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേക്ക് ഇങ്ങനെ ഡിഫറെന്റ് മീനിങ്സ് ഉണ്ട്. പല ക്രിട്ടിക്സും പല രീതിയിലാണ് പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേനെ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത്. ബട്ട് ജനറലി എ പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേ is supposed to focus on the complications arising from love, death, and betrayal, without offering the audience a decisive and positive resolution. So a problem play focuses on the complications arising from love, death, and betrayal, or it could be any of those combinations. ഈ മൂന്നും വേണമെന്നില്ല. അപ്പൊ ലവ്, ഡെത്ത്, ബിട്രയൽ, ഈ ഇമോഷൻസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഈ സിറ്റുവേഷൻസിൽ നിന്ന് ചില കോംപ്ലിക്കേഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടായി വരുന്നു. ആ കോംപ്ലിക്കേഷൻസ് ആണ് ദ ഫോക്കൽ പോയിന്റ് ഓഫ് എ പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേ. ബട്ട് unlike a tragedy or a comedy, a problem play does not actually offer the audience a clear and a decisive and a positive resolution. നമുക്ക് ക്ലിയർ ആയിട്ട് നമുക്ക് ഹാപ്പി ആവുന്ന അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സാറ്റിസ്ഫൈ നമ്മളെ ചെയ്യുന്ന രീതിയിലുള്ള ഒരു റെസൊല്യൂഷൻ പലപ്പോഴും ഒരു പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേ ഓഫർ ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല. അപ്പൊ അതുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറയാൻ രണ്ട് മീനിങ് അതിൽ വരുന്നു. ഒന്ന്, ഒരു പ്രോബ്ലം ഉണ്ടായി വരണം, ഒരു കോംപ്ലിക്കേഷൻ, a problematic situation arising from any of these things, love, death or betrayal എന്നുള്ളത് അതിൽ ഫോക്കസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് കൊണ്ട് അതിനെ പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേ എന്ന് വിളിക്കാം. Also, the problem play does not offer us a very happy or not even happy, very satisfactory ending. അപ്പോൾ ട്രാജഡി ആണെങ്കിലും കോമഡി ആണെങ്കിലും അതിന് അതിൻ്റെതായ രീതിയിലുള്ള സാറ്റിസ്ഫാക്ടറി എൻഡിങ് ഉണ്ട്. കോമഡിക്ക് ഹാപ്പി എൻഡിങ് ആണെങ്കിലും ട്രാജഡിക്ക് സാഡ് എൻഡിങ് ആണെങ്കിലും അൾട്ടിമേറ്റ്ലി at the end of a tragedy you should feel satisfied, you should feel fulfilled in some way, emotionally fulfilled. But the problem play somehow does not offer you that kind of a clear resolution. Now, why do critics consider Hamlet to be a problem play, even though it is a tragedy with a very clear tragic ending? It is because many critics say that the world of Hamlet, ഷേക്സ്പിയറുടെ ഹാംലെറ്റിന്റെ വേൾഡ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അവിടുത്തെ ക്യാരക്ടേഴ്സ്, സിറ്റുവേഷൻസ്, ആ കാലഘട്ടം എല്ലാം പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത് ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് എ വേൾഡ് ഓഫ് പെർപെച്വൽ ആംബിഗ്വിറ്റി. ദർ ഇസ് എ ലോട്ട് ഓഫ് ആംബിഗ്വിറ്റി ഹിയർ. Even at the end of the play, we can actually ask ourselves these questions which don't have clear answers. Like, for example, was the ghost actually completely correct or not? Or would the ghost not have, because it is the ghost of Hamlet's father, wouldn't he have presented matters in a way that is sympathetic to himself? What about this characters of Gertrude and Ophelia? They suffer so much and they die, but what actually was their crime that they should suffer so much? Supposedly they did something wrong. They betrayed their Gertrude supposedly betrayed her husband, and Ophelia supposedly betrayed her lover. But was the ending that was visited upon them actually a satisfactory ending? Most people would agree that it was not. Actually, there was no need for both Gertrude and Ophelia to die in such a tragic manner. ഹാംലെറ്റും ക്ലോഡിയസും അങ്ങോട്ടും ഇങ്ങോട്ടും കുത്തിക്കൊന്നിരുന്നെങ്കിലും നമുക്ക് അത്ര വിഷമം തോന്നില്ല. പക്ഷെ there is this overwhelming sense that there is so much. പൊളോണിയസ് എന്തിനു മരിച്ചു? പൊളോണിയസ് ഒരു പൊട്ടനായിരുന്നിട്ടുണ്ടാവാം, ഒരു ചെറുതായിട്ട് രാജാവിന് വേണ്ടി സ്പൈ ചെയ്യുന്ന ആളായിരുന്നിട്ടാവാം. പക്ഷെ Polonius was not implicated in the murder of King Hamlet. He was just trying to do what was good for the realm in the way that he understood. Similarly, Ophelia was just trying to obey her father, and in some sense she thought Hamlet is mad, so she was trying to help him. And Gertrude, probably it was wrong if she was actually involved in an adulterous relationship with Claudius while her husband was alive. But still, whatever she did, whatever wrong she did was due to love. So yes, these people are flawed, but did they actually deserve the kind of ending that was visited upon them, that they ultimately had to succumb to? And those kind of ambiguities remain. Hamlet, ultimately, what kind of a character was Hamlet? Was he a good person? Was he a bad person? Was he actually mad or just pretending to be mad? Was he justified in the kind of abuses that you see him heaping on people like not just the king, who probably deserved it, but Polonius, Ophelia, and Gertrude? Did he actually, was he justified in saying those things to them, in being very nasty to all of them, in being extremely self-centered in his search for revenge? So all those ambiguities remain, because of which probably even at the end of Hamlet we do not feel completely satisfied. So that is one reason why many critics consider Hamlet to be a problem play. അപ്പോൾ റിവെഞ്ച് ട്രാജഡി ആയിട്ടും പ്രോബ്ലം പ്ലേ ആയിട്ടും നമുക്ക് ഹാംലെറ്റിനെ പല ക്രിട്ടിക്സും കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. So these are some of the early ways of understanding Hamlet. And if you, I think I have put up a link to this book Shakespeare and Tragedy by A.C. Bradley. And if you read, he has 2 lectures on Hamlet. If you read those 2 chapters, you will also, he has a very long and detailed discussion of what are the ways in which classical critics, classical critics have tried to understand Hamlet. അതിന്റെ ഒരു വളരെ കൺസൈസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു വേർഷൻ നമുക്ക് ബ്രാഡ്ലിയുടെ വായിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവും. And then he is ultimately pointing out the problems in the classical approaches, and he is putting forward his own ideas, but you can just look through that as well. We'll come back to Bradley in a moment. Now, again, we are still going with some of the early and classical ways of looking at Hamlet. Classical critics say that we can, Hamlet, if you analyze the plot of Hamlet, we can see that there are 3 plots in Hamlet. ഹാംലെറ്റിന്റെ കഥയിൽ, ഈ ഷേക്സ്പിയറുടെ ഹാംലെറ്റിന്റെ കഥയിൽ 3 പ്ലോട്ട് ഉള്ളതായിട്ട് കാണാം. ആൻഡ് അത് there we have 1 main plot and 2 subplots. The main plot is the main revenge plot, where Hamlet, inspired by the ghost of his dead father, decides to take revenge on the murderer of his father, that is Claudius, and all the things that result from that decision, all the things that Hamlet does and all the events that follow from that. That is the main plot of the play, Hamlet. Main plot adana. But along with the main plot, there are 2 subplots that enhance the feel of the play. And this subplot is a thing that you can see in most of Shakespeare's tragedies. So, for example, in King Lear, we have the story of a father who misunderstands his children. The father, King Lear, he asks his 3 daughters how much they love him, and he decides to divide his kingdom and give it to them according to what they say. And the 2 elder daughters are not very sincere, but they say a lot of pleasing things to the king, and they receive the entire kingdom. And the younger daughter, Cordelia, is unable to, she doesn't feel that it is right to speak such insincere words. So she says, I love you as a daughter should love a father, nothing more, nothing less. And that angers the king. And he expels her, he banishes her from his kingdom and without a penny. And from there follows his tragedy. But that is the main plot. And as a subplot, we can see a very similar story of a lord named the Earl of Gloucester, who also has 2 sons. And one son is evil, but he's insincere, but he is able to play on the emotions of his father. And the other son, so that Edmund is the evil son, and Edgar is the good son, who is sincere but who is unable to convince his father of his sincerity. So ഇതുപോലെ subplot നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത് പലപ്പോഴും ആ മെയിൻ പ്ലോട്ടിനെ ഒന്നെങ്കിൽ റീഇൻഫോഴ്സ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ it stands as a foil to the main plot. Foil means something against which the main plot can be contrasted. So subplots in Shakespeare function either to reinforce the same message as the main plot, or to show the contrast between the main plot and the subplots. And then what are the 2 subplots? I think we already mentioned this while discussing the acts, the plot of the play. But the 2 subplots are, one is the Hamlet Ophelia romance subplot. That is one way in which critics say. Sometimes you can say the entire family of Polonius, Ophelia and Laertes, that subplot. So the Ophelia subplot is one of the subplots. And the second subplot is the Norway subplot. This is a very small element. We have the story of Fortinbras, the prince of Norway, who is trying to recover the lands that his father lost in a battle. And at the end, we see that Fortinbras is the person who inherits Hamlet's kingdom after everybody, all the important people, all the heirs in Denmark are dead. So these are even though now the story of Ophelia, Laertes and Polonius is very much part of the story of Hamlet. It goes along with that, but we can also see certain parallels. നമ്മൾ ഫോർത്ത് ആക്ട് ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്തപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ പറഞ്ഞിരുന്നു പാരലൽ ആയി നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നത് എന്താ വെച്ചാൽ ഹാംലെറ്റിന്റെ സ്റ്റോറി ദ റിവെഞ്ച് ആർക്ക് ഓൾമോസ്റ്റ് അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നമുക്ക് ലെയാർട്ടസിന്റെ സ്റ്റോറിയിൽ നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റും. സോ ഓൺ ദ വൺ ഹാൻഡ് വി ഹാവ് ദ സ്റ്റോറി ഓഫ് we have this love between Ophelia and Hamlet, which we don't even see. We are just told that there was a love between them. When we see them, they are being very horrible to each other. Ophelia is spying on him and Hamlet is being extremely nasty towards her. We don't see the love, but we are told that there is a love, and what we see are the consequences of that love encountering certain kinds of fatal circumstances. But we have the story of Laertes, who is a kind of foil to Hamlet's character, who is a kind of person against whom Hamlet can be contrasted, because Laertes is also put in much the same situation as Hamlet. After when Hamlet comes back from Wittenberg, before the beginning of the play, Hamlet was studying in the university at Wittenberg, and when he comes back, he finds that his father is dead and his mother has married his uncle. So there is the death of the father. There is also certain kind of humiliation that is brought upon him by the over hasty marriage of his mother. So that is there on one side. On the other hand, in the case of Laertes, when Laertes comes back from Paris, it is to see that his father has been murdered by Hamlet, and his sister Ophelia has now gone mad after being rejected by Hamlet, and also after seeing the death of her father. So we have a very similar kind of situation in which we find both Hamlet and Laertes, but the ways in which they react to these situations are completely different. Appo similarity mundu ee subplot le rendu characters thamil, ennal vyathyasam undu in how they respond to the situation. Hamlet, we can see from the beginning, he is very bitter, he is very angry, and he wants to take revenge, but for some reason or the other he is unable to, and many critics have given different reasons. ബ്രാഡ്ലിന്റെ ഹാംലെറ്റിനെ പറ്റിയുള്ള ലെക്ചേഴ്സ് വായിച്ചാൽ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റും, പണ്ട് കാലം മുതലേ ഓരോ ക്രിറ്റിക്സ് പറഞ്ഞ പല പല റീസൺസ്. അതിൽ സം ഓഫ് ദി ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് വൺസ് വി വിൽ മെൻഷൻ ലേറ്റർ, ബട്ട് the fact remains that Hamlet was inactive. He was unable to take the action that would bring him satisfaction. But Laertes from the beginning is very active. So he does the one thing where the king is scared when Laertes comes back from Paris, because it is reported to him that it is not just Laertes who's coming, a young man who's very good with his sword. There is a mob following him. So Laertes is beloved of the mob, of the crowd, and he is able to mobilize the people of Denmark to come and question the death of Polonius. So who killed my father ennulla question umai varumbo, and there is also he is also very he is aware that there is something very strange about the circumstances in which Polonius' death happened, that we don't know what happened, and the information was not given out to the public and things like that. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു RTA ഒക്കെ ഫയൽ ചെയ്യുന്നതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഫീലോട് കൂടിയാണ് ലെയാർട്ടസ് വരുന്നത്, ആൾക്കാരെയും കൊണ്ടാണ് വരുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് ഹി ഈസ് demanding that Claudius should answer for the death of his father. And that can be contrasted. So that kind of action, he acts too much. He acts very quickly, even rashly. But this is something that one can see as a very natural reaction to the death of one's father. On the other hand, contrasted to that, we have Hamlet, who is in much the same situation, but who just cannot bring himself to act. So that enhances the tragedy of Hamlet, to see that Hamlet could also have reacted like this. And Hamlet sees Laertes, Hamlet sees everybody else reacting in expected ways, and he feels even worse. He feels even more bitter about the fact that he is unable to react as he should as a dutiful son. So that is the Ophelia, Laertes, Polonius subplot. And on the other hand, we have the Norway subplot, where again, as we mentioned, there is a similarity between the situations in which Hamlet and Fortinbras find themselves. Fortinbrasന്റെ അച്ഛൻ നോർവേന്റെ രാജാവായിരുന്നു. അയാൾ മരിച്ചു, ഈ കഥയൊക്കെ തുടങ്ങുന്നതിന് മുമ്പ് മരിച്ചു. ആൻഡ് അയാള് he was defeated in battle by King Hamlet long ago, and he had to cede some of his lands to King Hamlet. That is all in the background. ഇതെല്ലാം മറ്റ് ക്യാരക്ടേഴ്സ് പറയുന്നതിൽ നിന്നാണ് നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാവുന്നത്. And now the king of Norway is the uncle of Fortinbras. Fortinbras and uncle ആണ് king of Norway. We don't. It is not like he is not an evil uncle like Claudius, but we also get to see that just like Claudius, that uncle seems to be a good ruler, and he feels that his nephew is a bit too emotional, too impetuous, and he tries to control his nephew. So the situation is very similar. Father is dead, even though in the case of Fortinbras, it is not like somebody has murdered the father. The father died, and however, he wants to take some revenge, which is the revenge that he wants to take is on the country of Denmark for depriving his father of certain lands in proper battle. And he also has this problem where he has a lot of ambition, but he is not allowed to achieve his ambitions because his uncle is the ruler, and his uncle will not allow him to act in the impulsive manner in which he wants to, in the very emotional manner in which he wants to act. But at the same time, he has an army full of loyal people who are ready to do anything for their beloved prince. Again, we can see the contrast between Fortinbras and Hamlet. Hamlet also has the death of his father that is bothering him, and revenge that he has to take. And he is also constrained from freedom by his uncle, who is a ruler. In both these cases, after the death of the father, the son did not, the prince did not, the crown prince did not become the king. Rather, the father's brother became the king. So all these situations are some of the situations at least are very similar. But in the case of Hamlet, it is a personal struggle. It's a personal conflict. Whereas in the case of Fortinbras, it is a larger political struggle. But again, we can see, and especially in that scene where in the fourth act, Hamlet talks to the captain who is part of Fortinbras's army, and in his reactions, we can see that Hamlet himself is aware of the similarity between himself and Fortinbras, and he admires Fortinbras for his action, for doing what he can, even when he is being forbidden from fighting against Denmark. He immediately decides to fight against Poland and take back some small bit of land that was lost to Poland long ago. So inaction എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ സംഭവമാണ് ഹാംലെറ്റിനെ ഡിഫൈൻ ചെയ്യുന്നതെങ്കിൽ Fortinbras, just like Laertes, is a man of action. But we can also see that Fortinbras seems to be a much better tactician. കുറച്ചുകൂടി strategic ആണ്, കുറച്ചുകൂടി tactical ആണ്. He seems to have the makings of a better ruler. He has some of the same qualities as Laertes, like he's a man of action, he inspires loyalty, he is very brave, all that they are similar. But whereas Hamlet is too inactive and whereas Laertes is too rash and impulsive, Fortinbras, we can see, has a little bit more of the qualities of a good ruler, which is probably why at the end of the play, Hamlet nominates him to be the ruler of Denmark. But at the same time, as we mentioned while discussing Shakespeare in tragedy, the substance of Shakespeare in tragedy, for all his good qualities, Fortinbras is not the hero. The complex character Hamlet is a hero, and therefore, it is not moral goodness or some kind of uprightness of character. That is not the interesting part of a Shakespearean hero. It is precisely the complexity, the ambiguities in his character, the combination of greatness and flaw that is most interesting about the character. That is why Hamlet's story is the main plot, whereas the other two are subplots that serve on mainly to reinforce the effect or the impact of the main plot. So that is about the three plots in Hamlet. And quickly, I will also mention some of the important themes, but we'll not go into it deeply because you can easily connect each of these themes to Hamlet. And you can look it up online or something. You will find a lot of material on each of these themes. So I will just mention, I will write in the chat box also some of these important themes. Mortality, the question of death. We have Especially in the gravedigger scene, we have Hamlet holding the skull of Yorick in his hand and confronting the whole question of mortality. But even throughout the play, the question of death, what comes after death, all these are very important. And of course, the famous soliloquy, to be or not to be, is also, it is about death, it is about suicide, it is about the question of what exactly comes after death. Is death going to be a blessed release from life, or is it something even more horrible than life? So there are many musings on death and mortality in this play. Then there is the question of course, madness and sanity, which we have already mentioned. And you can see there are so many different ways in which there are many dialogues that Hamlet says, which make you question his sanity, and and also question his madness. So you don't know, you never know whether he's completely mad or not. And again, the question of many things that Hamlet says in his madness, they are just random ramblings, but Polonius considers some of those to be very sage, very wise sayings. And then we also have Ophelia's madness, which we see on stage, where she expresses a lot of things that a well-bred young lady of that time is not supposed to express. She sings sexually suggestive songs, and she says a lot of things. She basically she expresses too much emotion, which is she was not supposed to do. A young woman from a noble family was not supposed to do any of those things. So madness and sanity are also, you can explore there, madness and sanity. Then the question of divine providence. There is a divinity that shapes our end. There is a divinity that shapes our ends. That line is very important. But generally, the question of the supernatural, fate, divine providence, how much of importance to you? All those questions can also be explored in relation to Hamlet. Then, of course, gender is a perspective from which you can analyze. Maybe one of you can do a seminar on that. If you look especially at the female characters of Hamlet, how do we reinterpret the story from the perspective of the female characters, or how do we analyze Hamlet from a gendered perspective? Some elements we have already mentioned, but there's so much more to explore there. And finally, not finally, I mean, there are themes will never end. എത്ര വേണമെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് കൂടുതൽ themes വെച്ച് interpret ചെയ്യാം. But some of the important themes ആയി പറയുന്ന another theme is a question of free will versus fate. So again, this നമ്മൾ ബ്രാഡ്ലിനെ സബ്സ്റ്റൻസ് ഓഫ് ഷേക്സ്പിയർ ട്രാജഡി പറയുമ്പോൾ അതിൽ പറയുന്നുണ്ട്, on the one hand there is a role played by fate, on the other hand there is a role played by this a man's actions, the deeds of men, especially the flawed tragic hero. About how much is free will responsible for the events in Hamlet, and how much is fate responsible, right? How much are circumstances responsible, and how much are actions responsible? So all these things can be studied. Good way of analyzing the question of free will versus fate in Hamlet would be to contrast Hamlet with one of the ancient Greek plays, like for example Oedipus Rex. So there is some critics have pointed out that there are different views on free will. There is an ancient Greek notion of free will, which in the story of Oedipus we can see that the whole idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, that no matter what you do, however you try to escape a prophecy, every action you take in order to escape from the prophecy is actually only leading you towards the fulfillment of that prophecy. So that is an idea of fate that we have in ancient Greek drama. So that's an Hellenic, or that's actually an ancient Greek idea of will versus fate. But in the case of Hamlet, some other critics have pointed out that what we see here is a more Christian notion of free will. So the idea of free will in Christianity is that a lot of things are determined by God, but human beings are still given free will. So what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong, all that is already determined by God, and the many actions have been set in motion by God. The circumstances are given to you by God, but within that, human beings have some free will. They have volition. They have agency to do certain things. So whether you do a right thing or a wrong thing is up to you. Whether you do a morally good action or a morally corrupt action, a morally reprehensible action, that is up to you. So that is the idea of free will in Christianity. And many critics point out that is the idea of free will that we see in Shakespeare's plays as well. So these are some of the ways of looking at Hamlet, and we will continue. There are some more perspectives. We can continue tomorrow, but for now we can stop with this. And if you have any doubts or any questions, we can address that. I'm going to stop recording now.